The scent of aged paper and dust motes danced in the cool, still air of the archive. Blake traced the spine of a leather-bound journal, their thumb a practiced guide over the worn surface. For years, this was their world, a sanctuary of forgotten histories, meticulously catalogued and preserved. Each document, every brittle photograph, held a story, waiting for the right hands to uncover its silent truths. Blake's hands were those hands, steady, precise, driven by an almost obsessive need for order. Today's task was a particularly challenging one. A collection, recently recovered from a series of exploratory digs near the coastal caves, had arrived in a state of disarray. The boxes, marked with smudged, almost illegible dates from the late 19th century, were filled with a chaotic assortment of geological samples, faded expedition logs, and personal effects of the long-dead researchers. Blake had spent the last 2 weeks painstakingly sifting through the initial crates, assigning each item its provisional catalog number, a temporary placeholder in the grand scheme of the archive's perfect system. He adjusted the small, adjustable lamp on his workstation, casting a focused beam onto the next box. Its wooden lid was warped, splintered in one corner as if it had suffered a significant impact. Unlike the others, this box carried no external markings, no faded expedition number, no hint of its contents. It was an orphan, an anomaly that grated against Blake's inherent desire for classification. He carefully slid a thin metal pry bar under the lid, applying gentle, even pressure. The wood groaned, then gave way with a soft crack. Inside, nestled amongst layers of ancient, decaying canvas, lay a single object. It was unlike anything Blake had encountered in all his years of archival work. Not pottery, not a tool, not even a natural rock formation. It was roughly spherical, about the size of a grapefruit, but its surface was a baffling tapestry of deep, swirling blues and greens, interwoven with veins of what appeared to be obsidian, yet shimmered with an unnatural, internal light. It felt cool to the touch, smoother than polished stone, but also subtly irregular, as if its shape defied perfect geometry. Blake reached for a pair of white archival gloves, his movements deliberate. He lifted the object. It possessed an unexpected weight, heavier than its size suggested, and felt resonant. Not vibrating, not humming, but as if it absorbed the ambient silence, creating a pocket of profound stillness around itself. He turned it slowly in his gloved hands, examining every facet. There were no seams, no visible points of construction, just the continuous, shifting interplay of color and substance. It was utterly alien, yet undeniably physical. He brought it closer to the lamp. The internal luminescence intensified, revealing intricate patterns beneath the surface, patterns that resembled nothing he had ever seen. They weren't crystalline, nor organic, but something in between, like frozen currents of an unknown fluid. His gaze snagged on a particular swirl, a spiral that seemed to recede into itself, drawing his focus with an almost magnetic pull. He felt a faint pressure behind his eyes, a subtle thrumming in his temples, as if his mind were trying to reconcile an impossible input. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, a rare occurrence in the climate-controlled environment of the archive. He set the object down on a padded tray, careful to avoid direct contact with the workstation surface. His meticulous nature demanded documentation. He reached for his camera, a high-resolution model used for digitizing fragile artifacts. As he framed the shot, the object seemed to subtly shift its internal light, a fleeting pulse that caught the edge of his vision. He paused, lowering the camera. Had he imagined it? The archive was a place of static things, of arrested decay. Movement, especially self-generated, was anathema. He dismissed it as an optical illusion, a trick of the lamp's light on the object's peculiar surface. Yet, a kernel of unease had taken root. He took the photographs, meticulously documenting the object from various angles, its strange beauty captured in cold, digital detail. When he was done, he sat back, staring at the artifact. The air in the archive, once a comforting blanket of stillness, now felt different. Thicker, perhaps, or thinner. He couldn't quite place it. The faint scent of aged paper seemed to have receded, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible metallic tang, like distant static electricity. He looked around the familiar room, at the towering shelves of books, the neatly labeled boxes, the hushed rows of archival cabinets. Everything was as it should be, yet a subtle dissonance had crept in. The edges of his vision seemed softer, less defined. The hum of the ventilation system, usually a constant, almost unheard background noise, now seemed to fluctuate, rising and falling in an irregular, almost rhythmic pattern. Blake pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He must be tired. The Coastal Caves collection had been particularly taxing, filled with obscure references and maddening inconsistencies. He opened his eyes, and for a split second, the neatly stacked boxes on the furthest shelf seemed to waver, their solid lines blurring into something indistinct, like a heat haze on a distant road. He blinked rapidly. The boxes solidified, returning to their familiar, unwavering forms. The object, nestled on its padded tray, seemed to hum with a silent, profound power. It was not just an artifact, it was an intrusion. And with its arrival, the pristine, ordered world of the archive had begun to subtly, irrevocably, unravel. It was a cold seep, an insidious whisper at the edges of his perception, promising more than just a mystery. It promised a fundamental reordering. The journal, its leather cover like dried skin, lay open on the archive's sturdy oak table. Blake's fingers, stained faintly with ink and age, traced the crude, angular symbols scrawled within its pages. The script defied any known linguistic classification, a jumble of lines and dots that seemed to writhe even under the scrutiny of the magnifying glass. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the air, or perhaps it was just Blake's hand, resting on the cool wood. Days blurred into a single, extended vigil. Blake ate cold meals brought by a junior archivist, rarely speaking beyond requests for more obscure texts. Sleep became a luxury, sacrificed to the gnawing compulsion to understand. The artifact, a small, dark stone carved with the same unsettling glyphs, sat beside the journal, emanating a coldness that seemed to sink into the marrow. Blake found themselves frequently touching it, a strange, almost magnetic pull. Each touch left a faint, metallic taste on their tongue, a taste that lingered, even after drinking water. Blake began cross-referencing the journal's symbols with other forgotten fragments, a ceramic shard from a shipwreck, etched with identical patterns, an ancient map depicting a coastline. Marked by a cluster of caves and a symbol disturbingly similar to the artifact's core design, a series of unsettling sketches found tucked into a forgotten mariner's log. Then, they became shouts. Blake found a 17th-century parish record detailing unexplained disappearances along a specific stretch of coast. A geological survey from the late 1800s mentioned unusual seismic activity emanating from the same area, near a formation of coastal caves. The more Blake unearthed, the more a terrifying mosaic began to form, each piece interlocking with the artifact at its center. A dull ache settled behind Blake's eyes, a constant thrumming that echoed the relentless questions in their mind. Were these connections real, or was the sheer volume of obscure data twisting their perception? Blake would sniff the air, then their own hands, wondering if the smell emanated from the ancient texts or from within themselves. Blake would blink, rub their eyes, and the world would snap back into its predictable, mundane shape. Yet, the doubt gnawed. One afternoon, hunched over a faded chart of the local coastline, Blake noticed a detail previously overlooked. A tiny, almost imperceptible symbol, identical to the central glyph on the artifact, was etched precisely over the mouth of the largest coastal caves. Below it, barely legible, was a single, repeated word in an archaic dialect: awaken. Awaken. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. This was an invitation or a warning. The archive, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, its walls pressing in. Blake felt a profound isolation, a chasm opening between their understanding and the conventional reality of their colleagues. They couldn't. They wouldn't be understood. They would be dismissed. Blake had to go. The journal, the artifact, the map, they were all pulling them towards the coast, towards the coastal caves. It was a pilgrimage, a desperate search for answers that no book could fully provide. Leaving the archive was an act of severance. The cool night air hit Blake like a physical blow, fresh and alien after days steeped in stagnant history. The drive was a blur, the familiar landmarks of the city receding into a background hum. The world outside felt flimsy, a thin veneer over something vast and unknowable that the artifact had begun to peel away. The briny scent grew stronger as the car approached the coast, the rhythmic crash of waves against rock a low, insistent murmur. The air was thick with the scent of salt and damp rock, and something else, something metallic and ancient, like the taste on Blake's tongue. Within the cave's blackness, a faint hum began, a sound Blake could feel in their teeth, growing louder, more insistent, like the turning of an immense, unseen mechanism. Blake raised a hand, touching the rough, cold stone of the cave wall, and felt not rock, but a pulsating warmth, a living presence that seemed to resonate with the artifact in their pocket. The hum intensified, and then, from the depths of the cave, a single, guttural word echoed, undeniably the same archaic dialect from the journal: awaken. The archive's silence, once comforting, now hummed with an unheard frequency. Blake sat hunched over the artifact, its intricate surface cool beneath their fingertips, a stark contrast to the internal fever that gripped them. The previous night had offered no respite, only a series of vivid, disorienting dreams. Not dreams of monsters or chases, but of impossible geometries and echoes of thoughts that were not their own, like distant, profound whispers in a language of pure concept. The artifact had shifted. It no longer felt like a mere object of study. Its patterns, previously static, seemed to pulse with an inner light visible only to Blake, guiding their gaze to a specific, almost imperceptible etching. It depicted a spiral, not unlike a nautilus shell, but distorted, its curves bending in ways that defied Euclidean space. At its center, a crude, yet unmistakable, representation of a coastal cave system. The artifact was not just a curiosity, it was a compass, pointing to a destination Blake felt compelled to reach. Blake gathered minimal supplies, a robust flashlight, a small satchel for the artifact, and a thick, waterproof jacket. The decision was not rational, but born from an internal imperative that overrode all caution. The archive, with its rows of silent knowledge, now felt insufficient, a mere prologue to a greater, terrible text. The journey to the coast was a blur of gray highway and relentless rain. Blake drove, their gaze fixed on the road, yet their mind was consumed by the artifact, which lay heavy in the passenger seat, wrapped in a canvas cloth. Its presence was a physical weight, a constant thrum against their very perception. The sky mirrored Blake's internal state, bruised and heavy, promising more than just a storm. Finally, the vehicle crunched onto a gravel path overlooking the sea. The air here was raw, carrying the metallic tang of salt and the deep, resonant roar of waves crashing against rock. This was the place. Blake descended the slick, rocky path, the flashlight beam cutting a hesitant swath through the gloom. The sound of the ocean intensified, a primeval bass note that vibrated through the very ground. Inside the first cavern, the air grew heavy, damp, and still. Water dripped from unseen stalactites, echoing like slow, deliberate footsteps. The artifact, now clutched in Blake's hand, grew warm, almost feverish. Deeper they went, guided by an intuition that was no longer Blake's own. The flashlight beam danced over walls of ancient stone, revealing striations and water-worn carvings that seemed to writhe in the periphery of vision. The cave system was a labyrinth of tight passages and sudden, gaping chambers. Each step felt heavier, the air growing thick with an unnameable pressure. Then, the first overt manifestation. Further in, the cave narrowed into a tunnel, its walls slick and glistening. Here, the air itself seemed to hum with a low, dissonant chord. Blake's ears popped, and a wave of nausea washed over them. The artifact vibrated violently in their grip, its warmth now an intense heat. As Blake pushed through, the tunnel opened into a vast, cathedral-like chamber. But it was not empty. In the center, rising from a pool of still, black water, was a structure. It was not carved stone, nor geological formation. It was a monument of impossible angles, of surfaces that folded inward on themselves, reflecting no light, absorbing all. It seemed to exist outside the laws of perception, a non-Euclidean geometry made manifest. Blake's mind reeled, struggling to process the visual information. Their eyes ached, their brains screamed in protest. Then, the sound. Not a sound heard by the ears, but felt directly in the skull, a chorus of voices speaking simultaneously, yet none were distinguishable. It was a cascade of pure, unadulterated thought, alien concepts flooding Blake's consciousness. Knowledge, terrible and vast, poured in. Blake saw, not with their eyes, but with their entire being, the true nature of the artifact. It was a key, yes, but also a fragment of this very structure, a piece broken off from a greater, unimaginable entity. It was a lens, allowing Blake to glimpse what had always been here, lurking in the folds of reality, a cosmic horror that transcended form and comprehension. The structure pulsed, not with light, but with an internal, sickening rhythm. The voices in Blake's mind crescendoed, not screaming, but exploding with alien truths. The cave walls around them seemed to ripple, the very stone dissolving into shimmering motes before reasserting itself, subtly altered. Blake's grip on the artifact loosened. Their knees buckled. Blake fell, consciousness fraying, the impossible monument searing itself into the very fabric of their shattered perception. They had deciphered its nature. The true cost of that understanding, however, was their own sanity. The archive's silence, once comforting, now hummed with an unheard frequency. The hum, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard with the ears, originated from the object resting in their lap. It pulled, a gentle but insistent tug, towards something unknown, something beyond the city's familiar sprawl. A decision, cold and clear amidst the swirling chaos of their mind, solidified. Blake rose, the artifact clutched tight, its weight a strange anchor. The archive, with its towering shelves of forgotten histories, seemed to recede, its structure wavering at the edges of Blake's vision. The streetlights outside cast a sickly yellow glow, each lamp a pulsating orb that stretched and warped in the humid air. Blake walked, the hum growing stronger, a compass needle fixed on an invisible point. They pressed on, guided by the artifact's silent command, until the scent of salt and damp rock filled the air. The coastline, a jagged line against the bruised twilight, materialized before them. The ocean roared, a ceaseless, hungry sound that swallowed all other noise. Water dripped from unseen crevices, echoing like the slow, deliberate tick of a monstrous clock. The cave walls were not merely rock, they were a canvas of shifting forms. What appeared as a natural fault line one moment would, in the next, resolve into a skeletal hand reaching from the stone, only to dissolve back into geological pattern. The crashing waves outside became a chorus of moans, each ebb and flow a drawn-out breath. The artifact pulsed with a synchronized rhythm, matching the beat of a heart that felt increasingly alien within Blake's chest. Who? The sound of their own voice was a foreign intrusion, a thin, reedy noise that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The boundaries of their identity, once so solid, had eroded. Memories flickered like dying embers, a childhood home, a forgotten face, the sterile scent of old paper in the archive. Each memory felt borrowed, a fragment from a life that might never have been Blake's own. The artifact's surface, beneath their trembling fingers, now felt like a continuation of their own skin, its intricate patterns mirrored in the sudden, burning ache behind Blake's eyes. It was the understanding that the universe was not indifferent, but inherently, fundamentally wrong. The cave itself seemed to breathe, its damp walls expanding and contracting with a slow, deliberate rhythm that resonated with the hum of the artifact. The water pooling at Blake's feet was not just seawater, it was the residue of countless forgotten things, a liquid memory of dissolution. Blake looked at their hands, seeing not their own flesh, but a lattice of shimmering light, a momentary confluence of energy that held the illusion of form. The determination that had driven them, the desperate need to understand, twisted into something else entirely. It was a compulsion to witness, to allow the unraveling to complete itself, not just around them, but through them. The air grew heavy with a new scent, not of salt or decay, but of something formless and vast, like the scent of an impossible color. Blake was no longer an archivist, no longer a singular being. They were a conduit, a lens, a momentary focal point for an encroaching, all-encompassing truth. The lines between self and non-self, between internal and external, had not just blurred, they had ceased to exist. And the artifact, a cool, unyielding presence in the center of this dissolution, was the key that had unlocked it all. Now, a peculiar clarity settled upon them, a cold, sharp resolve that cut through the lingering disorientation. The artifact wasn't merely an object of study, it was a key, and it demanded to be used. A destination solidified in Blake's mind, not through conscious thought, but as an absolute certainty emanating from the artifact's silent command. The coastal caves. The idea carried a weight, an inevitability that superseded all logic. Blake rose, the movement fluid despite the tremors that still occasionally ran through their limbs. The archive, with its rows of forgotten histories, felt suddenly small, a fragile barrier against a truth too vast to contain. They clutched the artifact, its weight comforting, a strange anchor in a reality that felt increasingly fluid. The drive was a blur of roadside markers and the rhythmic hum of the engine, a journey undertaken without explicit direction, yet Blake never doubted the path. The coastal air, when they finally stepped out of the vehicle, was sharp with salt and the metallic tang of distant industry. The path down to the shoreline was treacherous, loose shale giving way underfoot, but Blake moved with an unnatural agility, guided by an impulse that transcended physical limitations. The entrance to the coastal caves yawned like a jagged maw, carved by millennia of relentless tides. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing in the cavern's vastness, a sound that mingled with the restless sigh of the sea. The unheard frequency intensified here, no longer a hum but a resonant thrum that vibrated in Blake's bones, a symphony for senses unaccustomed to such depths. Deep within the cavern were the last vestiges of daylight. Surrendered to absolute black, Blake found a natural pedestal of rock, smoothed by countless tides. They placed the artifact upon it. Blake knelt before it, their fingers tracing the alien geometry. The fever in their mind sharpened, clarifying, transforming into an exquisite awareness. The truth did not arrive as a sudden flash of insight or a spoken word. It was a dissolution. As Blake stared at the artifact, its light seemed to expand, not outward into the cave, but inward, into Blake's very perception. The boundaries of their skin, their thoughts, their individual existence, began to fray. The cave walls ceased to be solid rock, they became porous membranes, pulsing with the same unheard frequency that now flowed through Blake's own veins. The sound of the waves outside was no longer distinct but part of a larger, encompassing rhythm, the beat of something immense and indifferent. Blake felt their consciousness stretching, thinning, no longer confined to the skull. It expanded, reaching out, merging with the damp air, the ancient stone, the ceaseless churn of the sea. The artifact was not a key to a door, but a lens through which Blake saw the true nature of reality, not a solid, defined construct, but a living, breathing tapestry woven from threads of thought, memory, and something far older, far vaster. And within this tapestry, just beyond the weave, existed an intelligence, not evil, not benevolent, but simply there, an omnipresent hum beneath all existence. Blake was not becoming a vessel, they were becoming a fragment. Their individual identity, the sum of their memories and experiences, was not being overwritten but absorbed, diluted into a boundless ocean of awareness. There was no pain, only a profound, terrifying peace. The distinction between Blake and the cave and the sea and the artifact dissolved. The final horrifying truth was the absence of horror itself. There was no monster to fight, no entity to appease. There was only being. Blake's last coherent thought was not a scream, but an understanding. The archivist had not discovered a forgotten artifact, they had been discovered by something that had never been lost, only overlooked. The entity had always been there, a silent, resonant hum beneath the noise of human comprehension. The waves continued their eternal crash against the shore. The wind still whistled through the cave's entrance. And deep within, on a smooth rock pedestal, the artifact pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, its intricate surface cool and silent. The air in the coastal caves remained heavy, saturated with brine and that faint, metallic ozone, a lingering echo of a presence that had merely shifted its form, and now, perhaps, saw the world through newly opened, boundless eyes.